Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road Journey. This week we're still in Leicestershire, and whilst I've been doing my best to avoid the city of Leicester itself, unfortunately today we're just going to have to deal with it. However, such delights are yet to come because we start in the south of Leicestershire on the county border in a place called Market Harborough. Our journey today will take us from Market Harborough through Leicester and on to Melton Mowbray, where I hope to get a pork pie. As always, to help navigate our way there, we'll be using a copy of my 1923 Michelin guidebook, period correct maps, and I don't even like pork pies. We begin then in the town of Market Harborough, which, if it wasn't obvious, is a market town, and in the days of my guidebook it may not have been somewhere that you wanted to live. In the early 1900s, the town saw rapid expansion, which led to some hastily built housing solutions where several rows of 10 to 15 tiny cottages were built, and you wouldn't have wanted to have lived there because they all shared one toilet and one water source. At the time of my guidebook's release, it said that over 150 properties in the town were unfit for human habitation. Sticking with the guidebook, and it suggests that we might like to visit Market Harborough Grammar School. Okay. Oh, I see, it's no longer a school. Yeah, that would have been weird. What we're looking at is an old schoolhouse that dates back to 1614, and you'll notice the building's interesting design where it appears to be a building on stilts, and yeah, that is exactly what it is. Known as the Old Grammar School, it operated as a school for around 300 years, and the space underneath was often used as a market. One source suggests it was a popular place to buy butter. As for why the building was constructed in the way it is, I've got no idea. It was funded by a guy called Robert Smith, or Robert Smythe, who wanted to build something to educate children who were less fortunate, and the building design was his idea, so you'll have to ask him, except he's dead. A short distance from Market Harborough is the village of Foxton, which is probably most well known because of a series of 10 canal locks. Situated on the Grand Union Canal, they were built in the early 1800s to get boats up and down a steep hill, but with 10 locks that was an awful lot of effort and work, but more so time. It takes about an hour to get a boat through the entire lock system, and in the old days this would have caused a severe bottleneck for canal traffic. A solution for this was needed, but it wouldn't be until 1900 that would come about with the Foxton inclined plane. Basically, it's a mechanical lift for your boat. It could transport 2 boats up and 2 boats down the 23-metre long journey in around 12 minutes, and it was powered by a large steam engine. Unfortunately, whilst it worked very well, it cost an absolute fortune to run because it needed a supply of steam 24/7 so that it was in a permanent state of readiness for any incoming canal traffic. This led to it being mothballed after only 11 years of operation, and in 1926 the entire lift was dismantled. Leaving Foxton behind, and we pick up the A6 to head north towards Leicester. Looking at our old maps, this road hasn't changed all that much until we get to a place called Great Glen, where the old A6 has been replaced with a more modern bypass. As a result, we'll follow the old road through Great Glen. What's so great about it anyway? Nothing. Alright then, moving on, and we quickly arrive in Leicester, and before we get into what my guidebook has to say, I've got a couple of detours to make, which takes us to the southwest side of Leicester, where we find a forgotten motorway known as the A46M. In 1965, the M1 motorway would arrive in Leicester, and at junction 21 they built a spur to connect the motorway to the A46. Because this spur allowed for only a motorway connection, it was put under motorway regulations and given its own number, the A46M. In 1976, the M69 motorway would come along and it was bolted onto the other side of junction 21, and as a result the A46M was downgraded to become an A road, and the A46M was lost forever. Just around the corner from the old A46M is an industrial estate where we find a company called Noble Automotive, which is a name that should sound familiar if you watched last week's episode. I'd like to share a story with you if you'll humour me for a moment. In around 2005, a much younger John was working in a car dealership when his colleague gets a phone call from a friend saying he's just bought a new car and would we mind awfully if he'd pop round to show it off. Being the car guys that we were, absolutely. So he arrives and starts offering passenger rides in a car that I'd never seen before, but very soon I would never forget it. The car was a Noble M12 GTO. They're not as bonkers as the Ultima cars that we discussed last week, but they're not far off. 0 to 60 miles per hour is 3.3 seconds and onto a top speed of 170 miles an hour. It's a fiberglass shell surrounding some steel scaffolding, and it makes for a very, very exciting driving experience. Back to the story, and as the turbos whooshed us along the country roads, I've never been more frightened when in a car, and it was at that moment I knew that one day I'm going to have me a Noble. If I won the lottery, I wouldn't be going to the Ferrari dealership or the Lamborghini dealership. I'd be coming to see these guys on an industrial estate in Leicester. Of course, no such vehicles existed in the days of my guidebook, let's see what it says about Leicester. It's a large city with a population of around 234,000, which in those days is bloody massive. Today it's larger still. If we take into account Leicester and its surrounding area, the population is around 560,000. My guidebook suggests that we might like to take a look at Leicester Clock Tower, which is found right in the middle of the city centre. Today, this clock tower that was constructed in 1868 sits in the middle of a busy pedestrianised area, but it wasn't always like this. At one stage it was actually a roundabout. This sort of happened by accident, but at the same time it was built because of traffic. Before its construction, we'd have been looking at a very busy open-plan junction between 5 major streets, and pedestrians were finding it quite difficult to get about. So they decided to build the clock tower as a way to slow down traffic and give pedestrians some sort of safe way to cross the busy junction. Over the years, things would progress from horse-drawn traffic to tramways being built around the clock tower, and of course, some years later, it was all tarmacked and turned into a road, at which point the clock tower became a very nice feature of a roundabout. Not mentioned in my guidebook and found to the north of the city is the National Space Centre, because we do all of our space exploration from Leicester. The big question, of course, is why, and the answer is because we can, although I do think the name is a bit misleading. It's a museum about space. A unique feature of the museum is its rocket exhibit building thing. Constructed in 2001, it's a structure that's made out of plastic sheets wrapped around a steel frame, and it stands at 42 metres tall. It houses some of the museum's larger items, including a Thor missile, which we've discussed before in previous episodes. If space exploration isn't your thing, then there's always the Abbey Sewerage Pumping Station Museum found just next door. Featuring 4 steam beam engines and a narrow gauge railway, I think the idea is that you off the kids or the grandkids to the Space Centre and then come here to enjoy a day out of Victorian engineering in the peace and quiet. Let's leave Leicester, and looking at the old maps, we'll need the B5A3, or the A6 as it's known today, and a short distance along we find Red Hill Circle, a large roundabout that didn't exist in the days of my guidebook, as it was built much later in the 1980s as part of Leicester Ring Road, known as the A563. Of course, like all good ring roads, they did a half-assed job, and at the Red Hill roundabout we're missing half a flyover. Anyway, rather than mess about meandering our way through Leicester, we'll follow the ring road around to the A47 and then on to our next item of interest, which is this, the Twiford Viaduct. It used to sit on the Great Northern and London North Western Joint Railway that ran between Melton Mowbray and Market Harborough, a line that opened in 1869 with trains running up until 1964. The viaduct is 230 yards long and comprises of 14 arches, which are about 60 foot high. It used to be a Grade 2 listed structure, but this was withdrawn in the late 90s because presumably nobody cared about it anymore. Before we reach Melton Mowbray, we pass alongside the site of the former RAF Melton Mowbray, and what I find interesting is that Dalby Road now follows the course of one of the old runways and some of the taxiway. Whilst a little bit overgrown, there's a nice chunk of runway still visible and the remains of 3 Thor missile sites. Those things get everywhere. The airfield, like many, was built during the Second Small Disagreement, with Melton Mowbray opening in 1943. Stationed here were the RAF Transport Command, and it was their job to ferry aircraft from the manufacturers' factories to where they'd be put in use. Next up is the town of Melton Mowbray, which my guidebook acknowledges as being famous for pork pies. So whilst we're here, I'm going to have to seek out this traditional dish, but before we do, my guidebook suggests we might like to take a look at what's called Maison Dieu. It's a structure that was built in 1640 and is otherwise known as an almshouse. These were often built to offer some form of low-cost social housing to those less fortunate, and were often run by volunteers or were associated with the local church. Opposite Maison Dieu is the local church. It's called St Mary's, and it was built in 1170, and at the time it was described as the finest parish church in Leicestershire. Until, that is, the Victorians got hold of it in 1865, where, in an attempt to restore the church's interior, massively buggered it up by doing a terrible job, to the point where the building could be described as no longer fit for purpose. It would stay that way right up until 2017, when a couple of £1 million was spent on sorting it out. Pork pies, we've got to get one whilst we're here, haven't we? And a short distance from Maison Dieu and St Mary's Church is ye Olde Pie Shop. It must be authentic because they've spelled old with an E, and it's the first thing that comes up on Google Maps when you search for pork pies. To be fair, the shop had been baking pies at the exact same location since 1851. It was opened by John Dickinson, although it's claimed that it was in fact his grandmother who created the world-famous Melton Mowbray pork pie. Just FYI, the shop shuts at 4 p.m. and it's gone half past, so we won't be getting a pie today, although not that I really mind, as I said at the start of the episode. Sorry. That's okay. As I said at the start of the episode, I don't really like pork pies all that much. I don't mind the meat and the pastry, but it's that weird jelly stuff that they put in between. I don't know what that is, but it's wrong. And there we are then, guys. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that. And if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That would be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John. You've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting Great British Road journey. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.